She stood trembling in a cold room as two men ordered her to strip. No warrant, no explanation, no female officer present. What they didn't know was that a federal judge had already seen everything on camera. And what happened next turned their abuse into a courtroom reckoning. But let's start from the beginning. The morning sun filtered through the airplane window as Samantha Miller adjusted her seatbelt. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of anticipation. At 42, Samantha had spent her entire adult life in the classroom, guiding middle schoolers through literature, history, and the occasional moral lesson when the world outside crept into their school walls. She was the kind of teacher who kept granola bars in her desk for hungry kids and volunteered to chaperone field trips others avoided. But today, she wasn't just a teacher. Today, she was a speaker. A chosen voice in a national conference on education reform, invited all the way to Washington, D.C., to share her unique community program for underprivileged students. The email had come out of nowhere, official, prestigious, and written in such professional prose she thought it might be spam. It wasn't. This was her first time flying alone. Her son, Michael, 12 years old and precocious, had helped her pack, placing a lucky penny in her purse when he thought she wasn't looking. "For when you feel scared, Mom," he whispered. She thought of that now as the wheels touched down. The engines roared and then fell silent, replaced by the mechanical clunk of luggage compartments opening and seatbelts unfastening. Samantha stepped into the terminal with her small black carry-on and her folder of printed notes tucked beneath her arm. She wore a modest navy pantsuit, pressed the night before with trembling fingers, and low black heels that had only been worn once, her sister's wedding, 4 years ago. Her phone buzzed. Michael, 12. "Watching you later. Be awesome." A small, proud smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She replied with a heart emoji and tucked the phone away. The Federal Convention Center stood just across the plaza, an imposing glass building shimmering under the early sunlight. The entrance bustled with conference attendees, all in blazers, lanyards, and purposeful strides. Samantha moved with the crowd, a bit slower, her nerves growing as she neared the checkpoint where security guards stood by metal detectors and sign-in desks. "Name?" asked a tall man in uniform behind a folding table. "Samantha Miller," she answered, offering her ID with a nervous smile. He nodded, scanned it, and pointed toward a side lane. "Random screening. That line." She blinked. "Oh, okay." A few others moved ahead of her through the main scanner, barely glancing back. She adjusted the strap on her tote and stepped where instructed. The security checkpoint looked like something temporary. White walls, a couple of plastic partitions, no visible badges or official insignia beyond the word "security" printed on black polos. "Remove your shoes, belt, watch, and step through," barked one of the officers. She obeyed. The scanner beeped once, then fell silent. Samantha expected a nod to pass through. Instead, the second man held up a hand. "We've detected a possible alert. Step aside for secondary screening." She froze. "I'm sorry, was something "No questions, ma'am. Over here." Something in his tone made her skin prickle. It wasn't rude. It was empty. Mechanical. Like he'd said this 100 times, but didn't care if it was right or wrong. They led her past a group of people waiting for badges, into a hallway with white walls and no windows. Her heels clicked sharply on the tile. They stopped outside a door labeled Private Screening, Zone B. "We'll need to verify you're not carrying any unauthorized materials," the taller guard said. "Protocol." She swallowed. Of course. The room was smaller than she expected. Dim fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A single plastic chair sat against the wall. There was no camera, no female guard, no mirror, just her and the two men who had already shut the door behind them. Her voice cracked. Shouldn't a female officer be here for this? None available, one said without looking at her. We'll be quick. She nodded, heart pounding now. What exactly are you checking? Possible concealed object. A pause. Please remove your jacket and blouse. The sentence hit like a slap. She stared at them, uncomprehending. Excuse me? We need to visually confirm there's nothing hidden beneath your clothing. Non-compliance may result in ejection from the venue and notification of law enforcement. Her breath caught in her throat. I've been through TSA. I have clearance. I'm a teacher. Silence. The taller officer folded his arms. Now, please. Outside, people were still passing through checkpoints, collecting badges, greeting colleagues. The day continued, normal and bright. Inside, Samantha unbuttoned her blouse with trembling fingers. That was the moment her world shifted. She wasn't in a conference center anymore. She wasn't a speaker or a guest. She was an object, powerless, exposed, alone. She folded her blouse and held it awkwardly against her chest. One guard stepped forward with a handheld scanner, though he never used it. She couldn't move, couldn't cry. Just exist. 10 minutes later, they told her she was free to go. No apology, no explanation, no record of what had just happened. Her steps were unsteady as she exited the room, adjusting her clothes in the hallway with shaking hands. She didn't realize her face was streaked with tears until someone gently touched her arm. Are you all right, ma'am? Samantha looked up into the eyes of an older woman, elegant in a burgundy suit, with sharp features and a calm, authoritative voice. It was Judge Annette Grayson, and nothing about her expression said random. But that's where the story truly begins. The door clicked shut behind her with a quiet finality that felt louder than a gunshot. Samantha flinched. The sound echoed off the sterile white walls, amplifying the sense of confinement. Her heels clacked faintly on the polished tile floor as she moved toward the center of the room. She was alone. Or at least, she thought she was, until the two men followed her inside and shut the door again, this time locking it. A faint metallic sound followed. Click. That was the first moment her stomach turned. The room was barely 10 feet wide. It had no windows, no surveillance camera she could see, and certainly no comfort. It looked like it had been repurposed from a storage closet. Plain white walls, no furniture except a single plastic chair, a folding table pushed against one side, and a floor drain in the far corner. Something primal inside her stirred. Why a drain? The taller officer, with pale eyes and a buzz cut, stood by the door. The other, shorter and broader, pulled on a pair of latex gloves with practiced ease, the snap of the rubber echoing like a warning shot. Samantha's voice cracked. I'm sorry, but why am I here exactly? I already passed security at the airport. I don't understand. Neither man looked at her. The one with the gloves opened a plastic drawer on the table and pulled out a clipboard. Secondary scan detected a metallic anomaly. Could be a concealed object. She looked down at herself. Her blouse had no buttons, just a smooth zippered front. Her pants were business slacks with nothing but a zipper and a thin belt. She wasn't even wearing jewelry. There's nothing on me, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I don't even wear underwire bras anymore. TSA has never flagged me, ever. The gloved officer didn't blink. We'll have to conduct a visual inspection. Please remove your jacket, your blouse, and your shoes. She froze. What? The buzz-cut man stepped closer. Standard procedure, ma'am. You can either comply or be removed from the premises and flagged for refusal to cooperate with federal security. But you're not TSA, she said softly. Neither answered. Her breath caught in her chest. She looked around the room again, now seeing it differently, really seeing it. No mirror, no badge numbers, no female personnel. This wasn't standard. This wasn't protocol. This was something else. Her hands trembled as she reached up to undo the zipper of her jacket. The air was colder now, colder than before, or maybe it was just her skin reacting to fear. She slipped the jacket off her shoulders and placed it on the chair. Her blouse followed, each movement mechanical, automatic. She was now standing in her bra, modest, beige, old. The kind of thing a mother wears on a workday when comfort matters more than style. They didn't tell her to stop. Lower garments, too. Her eyes widened. No, I want a supervisor. I want someone else here, a female guard. I don't consent to this. You're already here, the buzzcut man replied, as if that settled it. She backed up a step, shaking her head, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I'm not a criminal. I've done nothing wrong. I have a speaking badge. I'm here for the conference. Call someone, call the organizer. This isn't right. The gloved officer didn't even look up. This isn't an interrogation. It's a screening. You don't have rights here. That sentence pierced her like a knife. You don't have rights here. Her voice failed. Her hands went limp at her sides. And still, she didn't move. Couldn't. The buzzcut man stepped closer, arms folded. Ma'am, we're not going to do this all day. You're delaying the process. You either cooperate now or be removed under escort. You won't be allowed back into the venue. She closed her eyes. Her job, her presentation, the months of preparation, Michael watching from home, her students, everything swirled inside her. All of it hung on this moment, and they knew it. Slowly, like someone walking into freezing water, she unbuttoned her slacks, slid them down, folded them neatly, as if it made it better, as if being polite would protect her. She stood there in her underwear, every inch of her skin burning with shame. One of them stepped forward, holding the handheld scanner. He hovered it over her arms, her back, her legs, never touched her, but stood too close, too still. She felt the heat of his gaze even when the scanner beeped nothing. The silence in the room was suffocating. Clear, the gloved one finally said. She turned away, trying not to sob. She picked up her clothes and dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the zipper. No one offered her a tissue. No one spoke. You're free to go, Buzzcut said, unlocking the door. That was it. No apology, no form, no record, just the sound of the door unlatching and the sense that something terrible had happened, and no one would ever believe her. She stepped into the hallway. The air out there felt warmer, brighter, but it didn't help. People bustled past, laughing, checking phones, sipping coffee. A few looked at her as she emerged, disheveled, pale, unsteady. No one asked anything, except one woman, elegant, poised, silver-haired. The woman stepped forward gently, voice low. Ma'am, are you all right? Samantha looked up and locked eyes with a federal judge. Samantha leaned against the wall just outside the private screening room, the cool paint pressing into her back like ice. Her legs trembled. She hadn't even realized she was holding her breath until it escaped in a slow, ragged exhale. She wanted to disappear. Her hands still shook as she struggled to zip her jacket. The zipper caught. Her fingers weren't working right. They were stiff and numb, like they didn't belong to her. A single strand of hair stuck to her cheek, damp with tears she hadn't consciously allowed to fall. She looked down at her blouse, wrinkled now. The neat tuck she'd spent 15 minutes perfecting that morning was gone. Her slacks were crooked. Her heels suddenly felt too high, too loud, too visible. People passed her in the corridor, chatting, laughing, scrolling through phones. A woman with a latte bumped into her shoulder and offered a half-hearted, "Sorry," before moving on. No one noticed the redness in her eyes. No one saw the pain in her hunched shoulders. The world had resumed its pace, but she hadn't. Inside her chest was a knot of heat and nausea. She couldn't name what she felt. Was it shame? Rage? Grief? All of them at once, clashing like broken glass in a box too small to contain them. Why didn't I say no? Why didn't I scream? Because they wore uniforms. Because they said protocol. Because they locked the door. She could still hear the snap of gloves. Could still feel the cold air on her skin. Samantha touched her purse with both hands, gripping it like a lifeline. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the lucky penny Michael had slipped into the side pocket. Her throat caught. She couldn't go in there. Not now, not after that. She wanted to run, hide. She wanted to get on the next plane home and never tell a soul what had just happened. But she had a presentation in less than an hour. Her name was on the program. Her students were watching. Michael was watching. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet voice whispered, "You have to hold it together, just for now." She wiped her face with her sleeve and forced herself to walk toward the check-in table. But before she reached it, someone stepped into her path. "Ma'am." The voice was calm, firm, and oddly gentle. "Are you all right?" Samantha flinched. She turned to see an older woman in a burgundy suit, her silver hair tied in a low bun. She looked official, but not in the cold, mechanical way those men had. Her presence was composed, grounded, and her eyes, sharp, intelligent, were focused directly on Samantha's face. Samantha tried to speak. Nothing came out. The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My name is Judge Annette Grayson. I'm scheduled to open the keynote in 15 minutes, but I happened to see you escorted away from the main line earlier." Her tone remained even, but her gaze sharpened. "Was that a security issue?" Samantha blinked, struggling to find words. Her lips trembled. She looked around. No one else seemed to notice them talking. Then, softly, she whispered, "They made me." The judge placed a hand on her shoulder. Not firm, not forceful, just enough to steady her. "Let's step somewhere quiet," she said. Samantha nodded. The judge led her down a side corridor to a small lounge marked "Event Staff Only." Inside was a leather couch, a table with tea bags and instant coffee, and a single lamp casting soft yellow light. The door closed behind them with a quiet thud. Samantha sat. She didn't speak for several seconds. Her breath was shaky. Her throat ached from holding back sobs. The room was too warm, but her hands felt frozen. Judge Grayson didn't rush her. She poured a cup of hot water and set it on the table. "Take your time." Samantha stared at the steam for a moment. Then finally she began to speak. It came out haltingly at first, disjointed phrases, details, words like strip, no female guard, locked the door, no camera, and they said I had no rights. The judge listened in complete silence. Her expression didn't change, but her hands slowly tightened around her own cup of tea. When Samantha finally stopped, her voice raw, her eyes glassy, the judge leaned forward. "Did they touch you?" "No," Samantha whispered. "But they stood very close." "And you were alone? No female officers, no supervisor, no third-party witness?" Samantha nodded. The judge didn't respond right away. Then she stood, walked to the far side of the room, and took out her phone. She dialed a number and turned her back for privacy, but Samantha heard every word. "This is Judge Grayson. I need immediate access to surveillance footage for Security Zone B at the Convention Center. Yes, this morning, 10 minutes ago, room 3B. She paused, listened, then added firmly, "Don't tell me it's outside your jurisdiction. You know exactly which office I'll contact next if you stonewall me." Click. She turned back towards Samantha, her expression now colder, sharper. "They didn't know who I was when I walked in."
she said, almost to herself. But I know exactly who they are. Samantha's breath caught. Grayson sat back down across from her. I've seen this before. Same contractors, same random screenings, same complaints. 3 last year, all dismissed before internal review. You're not the first. Samantha felt her stomach drop. And now, the judge continued, you won't be the last either. Because I was watching, and because now I do have jurisdiction. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. We're going to document everything, and then, Miss Miller, you and I are going to take back this stage. Samantha stared at her. A tear slid down her cheek, not from shame this time, but from something deeper, relief. For the first time since that door had closed behind her, she didn't feel alone. Judge Annette Grayson had seen many things in her 35 years on the bench. Corruption, greed, lies so polished they glowed like truth. But even after all this time, she still trusted one thing above all: instinct. And the moment she saw the 2 security officers leading Samantha Miller away like a criminal, with that quiet, procedural ruthlessness she'd seen before, her instincts screamed. She didn't intervene then. Judges learn to observe before they act. But she watched, and she waited. And when Samantha reappeared 20 minutes later, pale, trembling, blinking like someone returning from war, she knew. Something had happened. Not a misunderstanding, not a minor mistake. Something deliberate. That's why, when she saw Samantha alone in the hallway, eyes red, blouse wrinkled, hands gripping her purse like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth, she stepped in. Not just as a judge. As a woman. As someone who had once been led into a back room by people who assumed power made them untouchable. Back in the staff lounge, after Samantha finished her painful story, Grayson wasted no time. She dialed her law clerk, Benjamin, a young but fiercely competent man who had been with her for 3 years. Ben, she said sharply, pull up surveillance footage from Hall 3B, timestamp 0912 to 0936. I want all camera angles near the private screening area. There was a pause on the other end. Judge, I think that wing's managed by an external. Then pull it from their server. Use my override if needed. I want it on my desk in 10 minutes. She hung up. Samantha sat quietly, her cup of tea now cold in her hands. The judge turned to her. You said they locked the door? Samantha nodded. No female personnel. No written explanation. No paperwork? Nothing. Did they record any part of the screening? Samantha hesitated. There was no camera inside. Grayson's eyes narrowed. Then we're going to find the ones outside. 10 minutes later, Benjamin returned with a tablet in his hands. His face was pale. Judge, you're going to want to see this. He placed the tablet on the table between them and hit play. The footage was grainy but clear. It showed the 2 guards flanking Samantha as they escorted her down Hall 3B. There was no rush, no urgency. They weren't responding to an alert. They didn't speak to any supervisor. They didn't check a clipboard. They simply nodded to another guard at the hallway entrance and led her away. The timestamp matched exactly what Samantha had said. Then came the worst part, the camera on the outside of room 3B. It showed the door locking behind them. The hallway remained empty for over 20 minutes. No other personnel entered. No one monitored the screening. And then, Samantha reemerged, visibly shaken, adjusting her clothes in the corridor. Grayson paused the footage. That's enough. Her voice was calm, but beneath the surface was a quiet storm. Samantha looked at her, tears welling again. I wasn't imagining it. No, the judge said softly. You weren't. She turned to Benjamin. I want background checks on both guards, employment records. I want to know who hired them, who they report to, and if they've ever been the subject of an internal complaint. "I'll pull what I can," he said. "But if they're contractors, it might be buried."
"Then dig and notify Homeland Security's Oversight Division, quietly." Benjamin left without another word. Grayson leaned back in her chair and looked at Samantha for a long moment. "They've done this before," she said. "But they picked the wrong conference this time. The wrong hallway. The wrong woman." Samantha didn't speak. She didn't know what to say. Grayson stood and walked to the coat rack, pulling down her judicial robe. "I'm supposed to open the conference in 15 minutes. Samantha blinked. "You're still going to speak?" Grayson looked over her shoulder, a spark in her eyes. "Oh, I'm going to do more than speak." At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., the main auditorium filled with attendees. Teachers, administrators, public policy officials, journalists, hundreds of them. The stage was framed with blue banners. A large screen behind the podium flashed the title of the event: National Forum on Education, Equity, and Reform. The MC stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to begin this event with opening remarks from the Honorable Judge Annette Grayson, Federal Appellate Court, Eastern District." Applause echoed across the hall as Grayson approached the podium. She was dressed in full judicial robes now, her silver hair a halo under the lights. She adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," she said, calm and clear. "Before we begin this important discussion on educational equity, I must address something equally urgent." The crowd fell silent. Approximately 30 minutes ago, a woman, an educator, was subjected to an illegal, unmonitored, and unauthorized physical search under the guise of security within the walls of this very building. Gasps, murmurs. Grayson didn't flinch. She was taken into a private room without explanation. No female personnel were present, no supervisor, no documentation. The door was locked. The room was not surveilled. She looked directly into the audience. She was humiliated. She was violated. And worst of all, she believed she had no voice. Her next words cut through the room like a blade. But now, she does. The silence was absolute. Behind the scenes, Benjamin distributed flash drives to reporters. The footage, the records, the facts. Grayson closed her remarks with a promise. "There will be a full investigation, and those responsible will face federal review. I will personally ensure it." Then she stepped down, not to applause, but to stunned silence. The kind that comes when people witness not just a speech, but the beginning of something unstoppable. Samantha stood in the back of the room, just inside the entrance. She had slipped in quietly, unnoticed. Her hands no longer trembled. For the first time that day, she exhaled without fear. And in her purse, the lucky penny Michael gave her sat warm against her palm, like it had been waiting for this moment all along. The applause had not yet died down when Judge Annette Grayson left the stage, her judicial robe flowing behind her like a banner of war. Her face remained composed, but her stride was faster now, more purposeful. She didn't wait for pleasantries. She didn't look for validation. She had work to do, and time was short. Back in the staff lounge, Samantha sat hunched on the same couch, still holding her now cold tea. Her eyes were wide, her pulse still high. But something had changed. She wasn't shaking anymore. She had heard every word the judge had said from behind the auditorium doors. The sheer force of it, the clarity, the certainty. It had cracked something open inside her. Not just hope, but a small, flickering belief that the nightmare wasn't going to be buried this time. Grayson entered the room like a storm contained in a glass bottle. Benjamin followed closely behind, holding a manila folder, his face tight. "I have something," he said, setting it on the table. "And you're not going to like it." Grayson took the folder and flipped it open, scanning rapidly. Samantha couldn't read from across the room, but she could see the growing fury in the judge's eyes. They're not government agents, Grayson said flatly. They're not even TSA-certified contractors. The company is called Red Watch Protective Services, based out of Delaware, registered under a shell entity. No public accountability, no reporting structure. She flipped another page. And get this, they've only existed for 13 months. Samantha's brows furrowed. So who are they? Private security, funded by a federal grant from a sub-agency under Homeland Infrastructure, Benjamin replied. They're on a pilot program, testing enhanced screening protocols at high-risk venues. Grayson scoffed. High risk? This is a teachers' conference, not a national security summit. Exactly, but it gets worse. He slid another sheet across the table. 3 other complaints. One from a paralegal at a courthouse in Richmond, one from a high school principal in Ohio, and one from a nurse attending a medical training in Seattle. Samantha leaned forward. And? Same company, same random screening language, same lack of documentation. In each case, no internal investigation, no disciplinary action, just silence. Samantha's heart thudded in her chest. They've been doing this for how long? Grayson tapped the page. Long enough to build a pattern, but short enough to bury the paper trail. She turned to Benjamin. Is there any record of disciplinary oversight? He shook his head. The complaints never reached federal ears. They were rerouted internally and buried. Someone is protecting them. Grayson stared at the documents, her mind racing. This isn't incompetence. This is strategy. She looked at Samantha. They count on their victims being too ashamed, too shocked, too disempowered to fight back. That's their play. Samantha swallowed. The pieces were falling into place now, and they were ugly. But why? She whispered. What do they get out of it? Grayson turned to her. Power, control, and the knowledge that most people won't say a word. She paused. But we're going to say plenty. By late afternoon, the federal judge had transformed the conference's logistics office into a makeshift war room. Surveillance footage from the hallway had already been downloaded to 3 secured drives. Samantha's statement had been formally documented, and Benjamin had just returned with a printed list of every employee affiliated with Red Watch working on site. There's a third man, he said, not involved directly in the search but listed as their on-site supervisor. Colin Drexler, former private military, dishonorable discharge in 2013 for aggressive behavior toward civilians. Works under multiple aliases now, but facial recognition caught him checking in yesterday. Grayson raised an eyebrow. Where is he now? Hotel across the street, registered under an LLC tied to the same shell entity. She tapped her pen on the desk. Bring him in. Benjamin hesitated. On what authority? She didn't even look up. Judicial inquiry under emergency ethics violation. I want him questioned off the record. If he cooperates, good. If he stonewalls, I'll file an emergency injunction. Benjamin nodded and left. Samantha stood near the window, watching the lights come on outside as the sun dipped below the skyline. This is bigger than me, she said quietly. Grayson turned toward her. Yes, it is. And that's why you were never supposed to talk. Samantha looked at her, her voice trembling but steady. But I am. Grayson smiled, not warmly, but approvingly. That's why we're going to win. 40 minutes later, Colin Drexler was seated across from Grayson in a small conference room. The man was thick-necked, dressed in a business-casual shirt too tight across the shoulders, and wore a permanent sneer of arrogance, like someone who knew he'd gotten away with things before and expected to do so again. I don't know what this is about, he said, arms crossed. Grayson remained expressionless. I think you do, he laughed once. Some lady cried after a routine check and now you're on a crusade? Her eyes narrowed.
Your people conducted an unrecorded strip search of a civilian without oversight or cause. He shrugged. We're authorized under the terms of our contract. No, you're not, Grayson replied. I've reviewed that contract. You have permission to detain and report, not to isolate, not to strip, and certainly not to threaten. Drexler's smirk faltered. Grayson leaned forward slightly. And we both know this isn't the first time. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. She continued, voice lower now, sharper. I've compiled 3 additional complaints. I have 2 reporters who already have the footage, and if you think I won't take this to the Inspector General, you've misunderstood the kind of judge I am. Drexler's jaw tightened. I want names, Grayson said, of who gave the order, who cleared the operation, and who trained your officers to believe that a woman's dignity is a matter of interpretation. He didn't respond. She stood. You have until tomorrow morning. Otherwise, I file a motion and go public. Your choice. Then she walked out. Samantha waited in the hallway, her arms crossed. When the judge emerged, she simply said, We just lit the first match.
The room was dark now, save for the soft glow of a desk lamp. Judge Grayson sat at a long conference table strewn with files, surveillance stills, and legal pads filled with her sharp, slanted handwriting. Samantha sat nearby, her body hunched forward in quiet disbelief, her eyes fixed on the open file in front of her. It wasn't just her. It had never been just her. The folder held 3 testimonies, gathered by Benjamin in a matter of hours, testimonies that had never seen the light of day. Women like Samantha, from different cities, different professions, different lives, yet their stories were horrifyingly familiar. The first was a paralegal in Richmond. She'd been randomly selected during a federal courthouse event, taken to a screening room, no female staff, no explanation. Humiliated, searched, and dismissed. The second was a high school principal in Ohio, attending an educators' summit. Same company, same process, same silence. The third was a nurse from Seattle, a trauma survivor. Her complaint was the longest, but also the most damning. She'd written it out in full detail, mailed it certified to the Oversight Committee. It was never logged in the system. Her letter ended with 5 devastating words. Please, just make it stop. Samantha closed the file slowly. Her voice was low. They've been doing this for over a year. Longer, Grayson replied, not looking up. That's just the period I can prove. She reached for another folder, one marked Confidential, Internal Memo, and opened it to a printed email thread. Samantha leaned in. What is that? A whistleblower, Grayson said. Anonymous, internal contractor. They sent this to an attorney I know in D.C. a few months ago. He forwarded it to me when I started asking questions tonight. The email described a chilling pattern. Red Watch was using screening protocols as a cover to test human compliance under psychological pressure. Their real goal wasn't safety. It was data. How far would people go if they believed refusal meant punishment? How many would submit to invasive searches without protest? How many would stay silent? Samantha's skin crawled. They're experimenting, she said. On us. Grayson nodded. And labeling it security enhancement. It's brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. Rapid in national safety, and no one questions a thing. Benjamin re-entered, holding his tablet. Judge, I've traced the contract line. Grayson looked up. Red Watch receives its funding from a DHS sub-program called Urban Threat Contingency Initiative. The program was created after a series of bomb threats in 2022. But here's the kicker. It's exempt from standard audit reporting under emergency federal authority. He paused. That means there's almost no oversight, no external review, and most of the contracts are buried under third-tier subcontractors. Samantha shook her head. So they can do whatever they want? They think they can, Grayson said. But they made a mistake today. She pulled a legal document from a folder and laid it flat on the table. At the top, in bold, Motion for Emergency Injunctive Relief, Eastern District Federal Court. Samantha blinked. Is that an emergency motion to suspend Red Watch's federal authority pending investigation? Grayson said calmly. If approved, it will halt their operations nationwide within 24 hours. Samantha's hands trembled as she touched the paper. I didn't think anyone would believe me, she whispered. Grayson looked at her. That's how they survive. They count on people like you staying silent. She tapped the page. But now, we're not silent anymore. Later that night, Samantha found herself alone in her hotel room for the first time that day. She stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like fireflies. Her mind was still reeling. So much had happened in just a few hours. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. The chairs were arranged with military precision. 3 on one side of the table, 2 on the other, and a stack of neatly organized documents placed exactly in the center. The seal of the Eastern District Federal Court hung behind Judge Grayson like a silent witness. Benjamin stood by the door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Samantha sat quietly at the far end, her presence unofficial, but vital. She had insisted on being there. She needed to see it, needed to see them. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the door opened. The 2 men from room 3B walked in, dressed now in cheap suits and forced expressions of composure. Jason Holt, the taller one with the buzz cut, and Marcus Lang, broader, slower, still wearing the smugness of someone convinced this was all just procedural noise. Neither of them looked at Samantha. Grayson didn't rise when they entered. She stayed seated, robed and calm, flipping through a file as if she hadn't even noticed them. Only when the silence had stretched long enough to make them fidget did she speak. Mr. Holt, Mr. Lang, you're here today as part of a judicial ethics review concerning conduct that occurred yesterday morning in this very building. You are not under arrest. Yet. Jason scoffed lightly. We were following protocol. Grayson looked up slowly, her eyes like sharpened glass. Is that so? He nodded. Our contract grants us the authority to screen individuals deemed a potential threat. Is that what Ms. Miller was? A threat? Jason paused. She triggered a flag. It's automated. We don't question the system. Interesting, Grayson replied, opening a folder. Because here's the report from the scanner log. It shows no anomaly, no alert, no flag. In fact, her name wasn't even on the randomized screening list your company submitted to our office 2 days prior. The silence thickened. Grayson continued, her tone sharpening. And yet, you led her into a private room, without witnesses, without a female officer. You locked the door. You forced her to undress. You offered no documentation, no rationale, no supervisor review. You violated not only basic protocol, but fundamental civil liberties. Jason looked toward Marcus for support, but Marcus stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched now. She could have walked away at any time, Marcus muttered. Grayson stood, and when she did, the room shifted. No, she said, voice rising just enough to freeze them both. She couldn't, because you made her believe she had no choice, because you used your uniforms, your badges, your silence, and your bodies to corner her into compliance. That's not security. That's coercion. She took a step forward. And you didn't count on me being here. Jason's mouth opened, then shut. Grayson picked up the tablet from the table and hit play. On the screen behind her, the footage from the hallway camera began to roll. They watched themselves appear, walking side by side with Samantha, flanking her like she was a prisoner. The camera caught the exact moment the door to room 3B closed, and the sound, click, lock engaged, a 23-minute gap. No other personnel entered. No one exited. Then Samantha emerged, pale, disheveled, shaking. Marcus shifted in his seat. Jason began to speak. "That footage doesn't prove. It proves intent," Grayson cut in. "It proves isolation. And it proves that the narrative you presented to the convention center's internal security team yesterday was a fabrication." She tossed another file onto the table. "This is your statement. You claimed Ms. Miller was aggressive, that she resisted, that she attempted to smuggle unauthorized media equipment." She looked him dead in the eyes. "Yet you confiscated nothing, documented nothing, logged nothing." Jason's voice finally cracked. "It was a judgment call." Grayson folded her arms. "Then allow me to make mine." She turned to Benjamin. "Call DHS Oversight. Tell them I'm filing an official ethics complaint under federal misconduct statute, and I want their license suspended pending investigation." "On it," he replied. Marcus stood suddenly, knocking his chair back. "This is insane. We've done this dozens of times. No one ever said—" That was his mistake. Grayson's eyes narrowed. "Dozens." He froze. The judge approached the table slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Lang. You've just confirmed that Ms. Miller was not an isolated case, but part of a repeated and systemic abuse of power." He opened his mouth to backtrack, but it was too late. Grayson pulled another document from her folder. "These are sworn statements from 3 other women. All describe identical methods. Same uniforms, same locked rooms, same silence." Jason sat motionless now, his hands clenched into fists. Grayson leaned forward, her voice colder than steel. "You may have thought you could intimidate her, that she'd walk out, feel humiliated and stay silent. But she didn't, and neither will I." She turned to Samantha. "Would you like to say something?" Samantha hesitated, then stood. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I was terrified. I felt like I disappeared the moment that door closed. Like I didn't exist anymore." She looked at both men. "And now you don't get to hide either." Jason lowered his eyes. Marcus said nothing. Grayson gave one final order. "You are hereby barred from federal facilities pending the outcome of this investigation. A full report will be submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office. If criminal charges are warranted, they will be pursued." She looked at Benjamin. "Escort them out." As they left the room, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow, Samantha watched in silence. Not with vengeance, not with triumph, but with clarity. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it simply walked in, pointed to the truth, and let the guilty collapse under the weight of their own actions. The hallway outside the temporary federal hearing room was silent now, heavy with tension. Where there had been arrogance, smugness, and dismissal only hours ago, now there was uncertainty, a kind of nervous anticipation, like the stillness before a storm hits. Inside, Judge Grayson stood at the head of the room, her robe sharp against the backdrop of Federal SEAL banners hastily rolled out by Benjamin to give the impromptu proceedings proper weight. But the dignity wasn't in the staging. It was in the eyes of the people now watching, court staff, internal security, and a quiet cluster of observers who had heard whispers of what had happened. 2 seats at the center table remained empty, until the door opened. Jason Holt and Marcus Lang walked in, no longer trying to appear calm. Their movements were stiff, clipped. Neither wore the suit jackets from earlier. Sweat had soaked through their shirts at the collar and under the arms. The confidence they once wore like armor had cracked. They sat without being asked. Grayson didn't look up right away. She let the silence press on them, let it stretch long enough for their own doubt to echo. Then, in one measured movement, she closed the file in front of her and looked directly at them. "You've made it to the end," she said. Jason shifted uncomfortably. Marcus stared at the table. "You are here under review for willful abuse of procedural authority, unlawful detainment, misconduct under the color of law, and suspected participation in a pattern of coercive tactics by a federally funded contractor." She paused. "These charges carry consequences that extend beyond professional reprimand. They are federal violations. You know that." Jason cleared his throat. "Judge, we were following protocol outlined in Section 7. Grayson raised a hand. It was not a request. Section 7 was superseded 3 months ago by a DHS procedural revision. That document, she pointed to the copy he had brought, is outdated and invalid in any facility hosting federal officials. Jason opened his mouth again. "Stop talking," she said. The room froze. Grayson's voice dropped an octave, not loud, but sharp, razor sharp. "I've spoken with the acting director of DHS Oversight. Your credentials are suspended pending formal investigation. You are no longer licensed to carry out screening operations of any kind on federal property. And as of 1 hour ago, Red Watch Protective Services has been issued a cease and desist for all active security contracts under their current registration." Jason blinked rapidly. Marcus paled. "But that's—" Jason began. "I told you," Grayson cut in. "You picked the wrong woman, and the wrong day." She reached into a folder and pulled out a copy of an internal Red Watch email, the one forwarded from the whistleblower. "I also now possess written documentation suggesting your team's behavior was not an accident, not a misstep, but part of an unofficial, unauthorized protocol to test psychological compliance under false security pretenses." Jason looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the wall. "You called it a pilot program," Grayson continued, "but it was never about safety. It was about power, intimidation, submission, and you were just arrogant enough to think no one would ever call you on it." She looked toward the doorway. Samantha stepped in. She wore the same navy suit, but this time her shoulders were back, her chin high. Her steps were calm, assured, her presence electric. She didn't sit. She simply stood by Grayson's side, as if she belonged there now. The judge turned slightly toward her. "Would you like to make a final statement?" Samantha nodded. She looked at the 2 men who had once locked her in a room and stripped her of her dignity, and when she spoke, her voice didn't tremble. "You made me feel small," she said. "You made me feel ashamed, like I had no power, no voice." Jason swallowed. "But you were wrong." She took one slow step closer. "I may have walked out of that room shaking, but I didn't stay silent. I refused to let this be my story's ending." She paused. "I will never forget how it felt to be treated like I didn't matter. But from this moment forward, you will never forget how it felt when that power was taken from you." Jason's eyes dropped. Marcus looked away entirely. Grayson gave a single nod of approval. "Well said." Then she turned to Benjamin, who had just returned with a final document in his hand. "Preliminary orders have been approved," he said. "We have full cooperation from the U.S. Attorney's Office." Grayson looked at the officers. "Effective immediately, you are to be detained under federal oversight. Marshals are en route." Jason stood suddenly. "Wait, what? You said this wasn't an arrest." "It wasn't," she replied. "But it is now." Marcus shot up, knocking his chair backward. "You can't do this!" Grayson's stare was deadly calm. "I can. And I just did." At that moment, 2 U.S. Marshals entered through the side door. No one raised their voice. No handcuffs were slammed. No shouting filled the room. Just the sound of silence breaking. Just the sound of justice arriving. Finally, the morning air outside the federal courthouse was crisp, touched by the stillness that follows a storm. The marble steps were lined with reporters, microphones, tripods, and curious onlookers.
But it wasn't a scandal that brought them here. It was justice, and everyone wanted to witness its return. Samantha stood at the top of those steps beside Judge Grayson, not as a plaintiff, not as a victim, but as a witness to the truth that had finally come to light. Below, camera flashes sparked like lightning. Voices called out from every angle. "Ms. Miller, how do you feel?" "Judge Grayson, will the investigation expand to other federal contractors? Do you believe this case will change national screening protocols?" Grayson held up one hand, not to silence, but to pause. Then she stepped up to the portable podium and spoke calmly into the microphones. "Yesterday, a woman was humiliated under the guise of security. She stood alone in a room that should never have been locked. She endured a process that had no oversight, no legality, and no humanity." She glanced toward Samantha. "And today, she stood before this court, not to accuse, but to reclaim her dignity. That is not only commendable, it is historic." Murmurs spread through the press line. Samantha didn't say anything yet. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Grayson continued. "As of this morning, the federal government has suspended all active operations of Red Watch Protective Services. A full investigation is underway, and any individual found to have participated in or covered up misconduct will be prosecuted accordingly." She paused. Justice has no favorites, no hierarchy. It belongs to the one who stands and says, "Enough." Then, stepping back, she gestured to Samantha. The microphones turned. For a heartbeat, the crowd was completely silent. Samantha took a breath. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," she began, "and I was terrified of what would happen if I spoke." Her voice didn't crack. "But now I know something they didn't." She looked directly into the cameras. "I wasn't the only one." Reporters froze. Pens hovered midair. That sentence hit with the weight of a thunderclap. "And there are others, teachers, nurses, paralegals, people who were made to feel like they didn't matter. But we do matter. And no uniform, no badge, no government contract gives anyone the right to take that away from us." A reporter shouted, "What's next for you?" Samantha smiled, a small, confident curve of the lips. "I'm going home, to teach my kids, and tell them that the truth is still worth fighting for." The arraignment for Jason Holt and Marcus Lang was held behind closed doors, but the outcome was made public. Both men were formally charged with civil rights violations under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. The charges included unlawful detention, coercion under the color of authority, and obstruction of a federal ethics investigation. Bond was denied pending further hearings due to flight risk and destruction of evidence concerns. Even more damning was the reveal that Red Watch's executive leadership had falsified compliance records to retain contracts across multiple federal facilities. The Department of Justice launched a full audit of all third-party security providers funded through emergency federal appropriations. By the end of the week, 6 facilities had terminated Red Watch's services. By the end of the month, Congress was calling for hearings. Samantha didn't care about politics. She didn't follow the drama. But she did care about a single envelope that arrived at her home in Missouri 3 weeks after the verdict. It was from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Inside was a simple cream-colored document. Stamped, signed, official. It read, "Notice of Recognition. Federal Witness Testimony in Advancement of Civil Oversight and Justice Integrity." At the bottom, in fine print, a personal note from Judge Grayson. "Truth doesn't need volume, Samantha. It only needs one person brave enough to say it out loud." She folded the letter slowly, then placed it next to the photo on her mantel. One of her and Michael at his last spelling bee. Back at school, her return was quiet, but meaningful. Her students stood up and clapped when she entered the classroom. She didn't expect it, didn't ask for it.
But the applause didn't come from knowledge of what had happened. It came from something else. They knew she had gone away one way and come back stronger. After class, Michael slipped a note into her coat pocket. "You were already a hero, Mom. Now the whole country knows it." She cried for the first time in weeks. The name Samantha Miller began appearing in articles about whistleblower protection, federal contractor accountability, and ethical reform in security practices. She didn't give more interviews. She didn't start a foundation. She didn't chase any spotlight. But when the opportunity came months later to help co-author a new legislative initiative for protective procedures in public security screenings, she said yes. Because now, when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the woman who cried behind a locked door. She saw the woman who turned that door into a national headline. 6 months had passed since Samantha Miller stood on the courthouse steps and declared to the world that she would no longer be silent. 6 months since 2 federal contractors were taken away in silence, their authority shattered and their arrogance stripped bare. 6 months. And yet it still felt like yesterday. The story had traveled far, further than she ever imagined. Not just through news cycles, but through living rooms, through classrooms, through whisper networks of people who, for years, had believed their silence was the price of survival. It wasn't anymore. And the world had changed because of it. On a warm spring morning, Samantha walked through the glass doors of the Capitol building in D.C., dressed in the same navy blue pantsuit she had worn on that dreadful day, the one that had once felt like her cage. Now it felt like armor. She wasn't alone. Behind her walked a group of advocates, educators, lawyers, and survivors, people who had written letters, shared testimony, and offered their voices to what was now known as the Miller Protection Act. She hadn't named it. She didn't even know they were naming it after her until someone at the congressional subcommittee meeting whispered it in passing. She didn't just survive it. She changed the law. The Miller Protection Act, passed with bipartisan support, now required that any private security screening involving physical contact include a same-gender officer, an informed consent form, and active video surveillance stored for a minimum of 90 days. Most importantly, it granted retroactive reporting protections for survivors. It was small, some said, but for those who had once been stripped of power in small rooms with locked doors, it was everything. Later that afternoon, Samantha stood by a window in the legislative gallery, looking out over the city. Her palms rested gently on the windowsill. She didn't cry. She just breathed. She thought of the girl in the hallway, the version of herself who had clutched her purse like a shield, shaken in silence, humiliated in shadow. And she whispered to that girl, "You made it out." Behind her, a voice spoke. "Feels good, doesn't it?" She turned. Judge Grayson stood in the doorway, her signature burgundy suit as crisp as ever, her silver hair now loosely tied back. "You kept your promise," Samantha said. "So did you," the judge replied. "I told you we'd make them remember your name." Samantha shook her head, half smiling. "I didn't want them to remember me. I just wanted them to stop." Grayson stepped closer. "They will. Because of you." There was a pause, one that didn't need filling. Then the judge placed a small card on the windowsill next to Samantha. "What's this?" Grayson raised an eyebrow. "A proposal, unofficial, of course." Samantha read the title. Committee on Ethics and Civil Oversight, Advisory Fellowship Program. Her breath caught. "You want me to speak, advise, help us fix the parts of the system that allowed this to happen. You won't be the only voice, but I want you to be one of the first." Samantha stared at the card for a moment, then smiled. "Okay." Back home in Missouri,
Samantha resumed teaching full-time. Her students never treated her differently. That was the beauty of kids. They don't worship heroes. They listened to them. And they listened when she told them the story, not as a courtroom drama, not as a headline, but as a lesson. Power, she told them one day, isn't about control. It's about what you do when you know someone else can't fight back. That's when your character is tested. They got it. Michael, now 13, came home one afternoon holding a school project. It was a trifold presentation board titled, "My Hero, Samantha Miller." Samantha stared at it for a long time. "I didn't even know you were doing this," she said. He shrugged. "I didn't think I needed to ask." She hugged him tighter than she'd planned. Months later, when the media had quieted and the hearings faded into archives, Samantha received a letter. It was handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sentence. "You don't know me, but because of what you did, I finally told my story." There was no name, just a signature. Room 3B. Sometimes, late at night, Samantha would sit outside on her porch, warm tea in hand, and look up at the stars, not to make sense of the past, but to honor what had come from it. She was never the same after that day, but she wasn't broken. She was rebuilt, stronger, quieter, braver. She had entered that building as one woman. She left as a warning. And somewhere, in a sealed courtroom file, were the final words from Judge Grayson's ruling, ones Samantha never forgot. When silence becomes complicity, courage becomes law. Justice didn't just arrive that day. It walked in wearing a Navy suit, refused to back down, and changed everything.